This week on Inside Olympia, how do cities and other local governments pay for expensive upgrades to streets, bridges, sewer systems, and other critical infrastructure? For 4 decades, a little-known state entity has helped fund those projects through low-interest loans and grants. But demand is increasing and money is tight. This hour, we go in-depth with Washington's Public Works Board.
From the TBW studio, it's Inside Olympia with host Austin Jenkins.
And welcome to Inside Olympia. Maintaining roads, bridges, water and sewer systems, and other critical infrastructure is not cheap. Local governments especially often struggle to find the funds to pay for repairs and upgrades. That's where a little-known entity called the Public Works Board comes in. For the past 4 decades, this board has helped cities, counties, water and sewer districts, and other public entities fund infrastructure upgrades through low-interest loans and grants. Here's some information about the board. The program was established back in 1985. It has since spent about $3.6 billion on 2,200 critical infrastructure projects across the state. More recently, the board has been helping local communities connect residents to high-speed internet. Funding for the Public Works Assistance Account comes from a combination of revenues from the real estate excise tax, public utilities tax, and solid waste collection tax. But demand for dollars for projects is increasing. In the last budget cycle, local governments asked for more than $600 million from the Public Works Board, and the needs are only expected to grow over the next 20 years. This hour, we will take an in-depth look at the Public Works Board and its role in helping local communities. In our second half, we'll talk with local government officials about their infrastructure needs and the role of this board as a vital lifeline. We'll also take you to one community where work is being done. But joining me first to talk about why infrastructure investments matter is Maria Jawad, Executive Director of the Public Works Board, and Catherine Gardo, the board's governor-appointed chair. Welcome both of you to Inside Olympia. Great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much.
So as we have established the Public Works Board, if you're in the business of infrastructure in this state, you've probably heard of this board. If you're not, you might never have heard of this board, even though it's been around for 4 decades. But in a nutshell, and I'll start with you, Catherine, why does this board exist? Why is it such a vital lifeline, especially for local governments and entities?
Well, this board was established in 1985, as you said, and it was at a time when the interest rates were super high.
Oh yeah, double-digit
Yeah,
interest rates,
super
well
high.
into the teens.
Yeah.
It kind of
And-
makes what's going on today look like mince pie.
And so the legislature thought of this program and put it together. One of our former board members was one of the key legislators who helped put that together to create a program where there was some reliable funding for communities to be able to get affordable dollars for affordable infrastructure. And that has been what we've been doing for the last 40 years. And it continues to be such a huge, important piece about keeping communities whole, to really help them thrive and help Washington thrive.
Maria, how do you, when you think about 40 years worth of projects and 40 years worth of building 2,200 plus projects, we could talk about each one of those, but we don't have time to do that. What is in totality, what does that mean for this state? What is that investment? What is the payoff, if you will?
Well, the payoff of being able to invest at this stage over $3.6 billion in public infrastructure means that the communities who need to build out their roads, that need to have functioning water and wastewater systems, for us to be able to look at the future for what capacity sewer systems can provide to meet the demand for housing and growth in the future. I mean, that type of investment long term, having started 40 years back and looking to the future of another 40 years, I think is really critical for being able to maintain local infrastructure in local communities.
The bottom line, though, is that the need never goes away, and if anything, maybe it increases. The whole idea here is low interest borrowing for these communities, grants at times. There is this sort of dedicated source of funds for this, although as we'll talk about, the legislature needs to actually appropriate those. What if the last 40 years you can point to how much money has been spent, how many projects have been built, the fact that no one's defaulted on a loan, and you can count those as real successes, what does the future start to look like? What are the pressures on this program? What are the needs that are looming out there?
Well, on our side of it, there are communities, infrastructure is aging. Just as people age, so does infrastructure. And so there's also a demand in cities to increase densities. And oftentimes when you increase densities, you may have to increase the size of your sewage treatment plant, or perhaps add a new water pump system to be able to get water to a new community. So there's all those pieces to really maintaining infrastructure. What I like to say is oftentimes we just expect infrastructure to work. We just expect to be able to turn on the tap and we get water, or flush the toilet and it goes away. And the only time we notice it is when it doesn't work. And so thankfully, that doesn't happen too often, but if we don't maintain our infrastructure, if we don't upgrade our infrastructure, it doesn't last forever. And so that's part of the reason the board is here. The board is here to help communities build their infrastructure, maintain their infrastructure, and then it also helps with economic development. It helps with strong communities. It's just a basic necessity of life.
Maria, as the executive director, how are you thinking about the next 2, 5, 10 years?
Well,
the next decade for this program.
The next decade, absolutely. Well, as a board, we've been leaning into a lot of different spaces. It's very important that there's the predictability of financing for local jurisdictions to turn to, and so that's fundamental. But on top of that, looking to the future and understanding that our infrastructure must be designed and built out in a way that accommodates the different types of climate changes that we are experiencing, and to be able to ensure that investments that are being made across the state really are designed to withstand those types of changes is critical to the work going forward from my perspective.
So there's a climate resiliency component to this.
Absolutely.
Can you give us an example of where that comes into play in terms of a project?
Absolutely. So a project where, say, for example, there's a stormwater infrastructure upgrade project. It's really important for that to have been able to be designed with the conditions that you might expect, different types of rainfall patterns that may be impacting how a stormwater system is functioning. Those types of considerations being built into the design so that it's going to function into the future, I think, is one example of where there's a chance to do that type of planning.
One of the things that we've been hearing about for the last several years is the influx of federal infrastructure dollars to states as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. I realize your agency is not a pass-through for those dollars, but can you help us understand, given the immense need out there for infrastructure upgrades, the extent to which those federal dollars have changed the coin of the realm? Have they been a game changer? Have they taken pressure off of you and your funds because there was this flood of federal money coming in? Or have you not really noticed it change the kind of equation?
The federal funds are totally important. But the funding that we provide is, as I mentioned earlier today, is that it's for many small projects, small things that people, for example, in Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, the city decided that they wanted to change all of their light bulbs. So we do roads, streets, and bridges, and so they wanted to change all of their overhead lights that in their in an area of their town, so they could put in LEDs rather than having the high sodium bulbs. And so they took out a loan to be able to replace those light fixtures and light bulbs, and then were able to pay back the loan from all of their savings. And that is not a typical federal project. That's kind of a local project, and somebody really forward-thinking, going, what can we do to make our community safer? And also at the same time save money. And they took out a low interest loan to do that. And so even though there has been federal funding, and we do support federal funding through some of the monies that go to some of the programs that the federal government has, but a lot of times it's these small projects which really make a difference in a community that happen because of the funding we have.
And that you're saying would not be eligible typically for the federal funds.
Exactly.
Maria, how would you think about the role of the federal government and these two particular recent laws and what has been described as once in a generation? I mean, arguably it's once in a couple of generations levels of investment.
Well, from the perspective of the Public Works Board, we have a coordinating body that we call SYNC. It's a space where the Departments of Health and Ecology and the Transportation Improvement Board and some of the other state local programs for transportation come together and make sure that we've coordinated on projects. We have very much taken the moment that we had, recognizing that there is a significant amount of investment available for communities, and we've made sure that projects that are eligible for those types of federal funds were prioritized. And so from an internal staffing perspective, we definitely cross-referenced our lists to make sure that we were providing for that the Public Works Board's state funding sources were able to support the types of projects that weren't the best fit for some of those other federal programs. So you're right, there was definitely an opportunity to see
If you could leverage federal dollars,
Yeah.
you might as well do that.
Right, exactly.
Do you think that this federal money changes the conversation in the state or gets us miles farther down the road in terms of infrastructure needs? Or is it because of the scope of what we need a drop in the bucket? Do you have a sense yet?
Well, there's still many billions of dollars needed to provide for the financing of the future. And while it was a drop in the bucket because there continues to be a significant demand for financing, there was a time for there to be an investment in the most critical projects that could get off the ground.
And of course, the federal government would say this was never intended to cover all of the needs. It was a down payment on a much bigger infrastructure deficit in this country. So you mentioned SYNC. Let's stick with that for a moment because we're in the midst of at the beginnings of a legislative session, and I want to talk a little bit about the interface between the board and the legislature. Let's begin with SYNC, which is expiring, as I understand it. You are asking that it be re-upped. Help us understand, you've explained what it is, why the need to continue it, what is this legislation going to do? Do you want to jump in here,
Sure.
Catherine?
The SYNC collaborative is truly an amazing group that comes together monthly to talk about different infrastructure priorities, ways to approach infrastructure funding, ways to approach just how to serve communities best. And we have one of our board members is our SYNC, attends those meetings, and I know Maria actually runs the meetings. And I know from hearing at the board meetings what gets decided is really collaborative and helpful towards making sure that we use the state and any federal funding the best and the most economically and towards the best projects that are out there. So I find, at least when I hear about SYNC, that the SYNC meetings are really supporting the people of the state of Washington and making sure we get the best projects funded.
And there's also, I take it, an advantage to the potential recipients of funds, because the idea here is that if you can get the agencies that have the funds or the pass-throughs for the funds and they're talking, you can coordinate, streamline, make this easier for the recipients, sort of create a more of a one-stop shopping experience. You also, I know when you are giving out funds, want people to be thinking, could we do 2 projects and dig once, for instance? But again, this is expiring. I guess there's an expiration date on it. So what's the ask of the legislature?
The ask of the legislature is to remove the expiration date so that the statute as it is written will just remain as it is, and it will allow...
And keep the band together.
It keeps the band together and makes sure that as things change over the course of our, folks come and go in state government, it just maintains a priority for this level of coordination.
Is there any sense of where the legislature lands on this? Are you on pins and needles, or are you pretty confident that this is the sort of request that will be
So far, so
honored?
good.
Okay.
Fingers
no
crossed.
reason to get rid of sync. I also want to ask about, we talked about the funding sources, and that's, I guess, in statute, is that the board gets or the Public Works Fund gets a percentage of those tax revenues, real estate excise tax and so forth. But then the legislature actually needs to appropriate them.
But there's actually one more piece of funding that's super important to that equation. So yes, we get 3 tax revenues, and our 4th revenue stream is the loan repayments. So we basically 90% of our money goes out as low-interest loans, and those loans range anywhere from, this last cycle, from 0.42% to 1.69%. And in today's economics, those are really good rates.
You can't get those rates anywhere else.
No, absolutely not.
So as people are repaying, as entities are repaying their loans, you're getting the interest off of those.
The interest is, the loan
Yeah.
payments come back plus the interest.
Right. So is
And
that actually the biggest chunk of your funding?
It's a third of the.
It's a third of the funding, the loan repayments, and then you've got the tax
Right.
pieces.
And so it's 4 sources of funding, but we still have to get appropriated from the legislature to be able to use any of the funding.
And there's a little bit of history here, which is that when the state has found itself on kind of economic hard times, budgetary hard times, there was it was fairly easy for the legislature to sweep some of the public works funds out and put them into the general fund. So tell us a little bit about that history.
And the legislature has the right to do that. They have the right to be able to use the funding for something else. But as the chair of the board and as a member of the board, I know how important these funds are for our communities across the state. And the benefit of having these funds used for infrastructure is not only just the jobs that are created, the economic development that's created out of improving the infrastructure, the potential affordable housing that can be built because of upgrading infrastructure, but there's also a tax, sales tax piece too, because oftentimes most construction projects have products that are put in the ground or put in a bridge, and all of those items are subject to sales tax. So we estimate that anywhere up to $40 million in this current biennium we are in right now is potentially coming back to the state in sales tax. So there are so many benefits to what this Public Works Board and the funding we provide to projects across the state, and how they affect our state's well-being.
So given that there is a projected multi-billion-dollar shortfall in the state budget over the next 4 years, what is the conversation around, or maybe the concern level around the legislature potentially sweeping some of these funds, as they have done in the past during harder times?
There's always the concern, and there's always the concern, and we have to take it as as something that we need to be very aware of. And our board spent time this last week up on the Hill with legislators talking about the importance of funding the Public Works Board. And we do groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings throughout the year where we invite legislators to come out and see the projects, because I think oftentimes what's really helpful is when a legislator sees a project, they're like, oh, that was my community. That's a really important project, whether it's an expansion to a wastewater treatment plant or new stormwater pipes or a new water line. And so we try to have conversations with the legislature throughout the year, but especially right now, it's super important.
I should just note that the legislature has been doing these diversions up through 2023, and that it was during times of recession, budget crunches, but also, for instance, to help pay for the McCleary K-12 funding decision. Okay, I want to, in the few minutes we have left, ask you about a couple of other issues. One is just to be clear, given I asked you about the federal infrastructure dollars, but given the new federal administration and the fact that, at least momentarily, the spigot was turned off on funds going to states, do you have any sense at this point about whether there is sort of a X factor in terms of the work you're doing and sort of unpredictability from the other Washington.
All I'll say is our dollars in the Public Works Board become more important, super important. And because as one of our staff people said, we could be the only game in town. And we hope that's not the case, but we do know the importance of this program.
I know there's been some criticisms over the years. One about uneven distribution of funds, smaller or more rural communities expressing concerns about perceived inequality in funding mechanisms, in their view, which they think favors the larger municipalities with more resources who are prepared to compete more. What do you say to that?
I know that the board and staff do an amazing job to really look at distributions across the state, and I don't think we have the numbers with us today on that, but are they on our website?
When you look at the information on the spread of projects, all 39 counties have received funding at some point over the course of the 40 years. And we have what we do right now to try to understand geographic distribution of projects, we show it on a map. We have what we call the Sync Data Dashboard. And not only are we looking at what the Public Works Board is providing in terms of its funds, but we're comparing against what other state financing programs are providing. And we are then using that moment to assess, are there communities that haven't been receiving necessary financing, and what does it look like for us to provide technical assistance?
And have you found that to be the case at times?
There are communities that are across Washington state who, in particular, I think the Public Works Board wants to work very closely with rural and small communities in Washington state that have a demand for infrastructure financing, and the type of technical assistance that needs to be provided from the state level really is more than just getting your application put together. In some cases, this is really an evaluation of what it can be afforded by those communities, since we're looking at loan programs. There has to be a payback mechanism. So we're looking at those pieces of how to best assist those communities.
Another criticism has just been the complexity of the process, which could go to why a smaller community that has fewer resources might not even tackle this, as this
Right.
just seems like too much bureaucracy. What have you done to try to make the application process less Byzantine, more streamlined?
Well, we have made it so that the application process really asks key fundamental pieces of information that aren't necessarily that challenging to put together. Our goal is to make it so that you can provide a basic outline of what you are planning to do so that the project speaks for itself. It's not about having a really good grant writer. It's really about understanding what is the demand for the project. And so from the team's perspective, we have cleared as many different barriers as we can to really reach out and work closely with communities interested in financing.
And I know, Catherine, one of the points that you advertise about this is that these funds come with a lot fewer hoops or requirements, especially as compared to federal funds. So one last kind of area of criticism that seems to come up from time to time is that there's too much, or potentially too much, legislative influence. Are lawmakers having any ability to say we want this project in our district funded as opposed to something else?
There is obviously jurisdictions can go directly to the legislature to request money. Our process does not involve the legislature.
To be clear, if they go to their legislators, a different pot of money or this pot of money?
That's always up to the legislature.
But there can be a way to kind of come in a different door, so to speak.
No, I would say not, unless the legislature decides that they are going to find money for a certain set of projects. And they may come to take it from the Public Works Assistance account, but they may take it from somewhere else. Our process is very we get appropriations, we run through an application cycle, we rate and rank projects, and then the board approves those projects.
Ranks them and approves them.
Ranks and approves them. So last year we did it. We opened the cycle May 1st, it closed it July 1st or around that time, and awarded projects September 1st. And so projects were ready to start the process of being built soon thereafter. Okay. So that's pretty fast.
Okay. We are out of time. Maria, I want to ask you one just kind of for a closing statement here. Again, as you think about the future, the next steps for this program, what's the final message you want to leave us with?
Well, I would say that the Public Works Board is really excited to be able to lean into providing the infrastructure financing of local jurisdictions. We really want to make sure that there's a place to turn to when the project that you need requires some level of financing. And again, we would like to be able to work with as many different communities as we can. The type of technical assistance that our team and other folks across the state can provide to make sure that the projects that are going to be sustainable into the future are going to be able to be funded. I think that's important.
And you can't help if people don't ask. Okay, we're going to stop there. Maria Jawad, the Executive Director of the Public Works Board, thank you for coming in. Appreciate it. Catherine Gardo, the Public Works Board Chair. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And we're not done. When we return, what are the infrastructure challenges facing local governments, and how is the Public Works Board helping them meet those challenges? Back after this with some local government officials.
Our leaders were very hesitant when we started this, and now I watch them and they celebrate it. They are very proud of what we've accomplished, and that model is not talked about just in Washington State. This is talked about nationally, and that, to me, that's what makes me most proud.
We learned to work together. We learned to listen to each other, and we learned respect and how to seek solutions.
And welcome back to Inside Olympia. The Washington State Public Works Board is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. While the board is not well known to most Washingtonians, chances are it has helped pay for an infrastructure project in your community. In a moment, we will hear from two local government officials about the challenges of funding big projects and the role of the Public Works Board in helping them get shovels in the ground. But first, TVW's Jennifer Huntley shows us where one community is getting work done that will have a big impact on the future for its residents.
On a chilly mid-September day, a construction crew is busy hanging steel cable between electric poles on the stretch of Highway 7 between the towns of Elby and Mineral. It may not look like a big project, but when it's completed, the results will be life-changing for those who live and work in this rural area of Pierce and Lewis counties. That's because many residents will have access to high-speed internet for the first time.
Broadband access has been really identified as a critical need for rural communities that don't have it, so that they can have the same or similar comparable living standards that their urban counterparts already have and have enjoyed for many years.
Willie Painter is the Broadband and External Funding Manager for the Lewis County Public Utility District. He says back in 2019, the district funded a study about broadband accessibility. The result, 7 out of 10 households did not have access to broadband.
Governor Inslee takes unprecedented steps to slow the spread of coronavirus.
A few months later, the global pandemic shut down the world and moved everything online.
So we had families and businesses talking about how adults had to stay home and remote into work, but how could they do that if they didn't have broadband access? Children were being sent home from school, but how could they learn remotely if they didn't have high enough speed internet access so that they could have classroom conversations with their peers and with their teachers?
I have you take safety on the Jupiter Hills Court structure fire. We saw fire in the attic with crews inside.
Without strong internet, emergency services struggle to communicate and respond on time. Fire crews had issues maintaining a phone call or finding a house. And the need for responsive emergency services was critical. Rural parts of Lewis County are some of the worst areas in the state for domestic violence.
There's times where you hear people, oh, my call got dropped 6 times, but I'm glad you got here.
Fire Chief Matt Medford says along with longtime residents having issues with the lack of service, the pandemic lured city dwellers to the area, taxing already scarce resources.
The Valley experienced a large boom during COVID of people getting out of the city into the country. People who could remote work could and did. that could afford it. Our area surged with a population. Our call volume went through the roof. And you could tell that the systems were taxed because the DSL lines would die down.
At the same time, unemployment in Lewis County was at an all-time high. More than 12% of the county lived below the poverty level. Lewis County also ranked 30th for overall health out of 39 counties, and telemedicine was considerably less reliable. Something had to change, but the cost was insurmountable. In 2021, the Lewis County Public Utility District applied for funds from the Washington State Public Works Board to bring fiber internet to these rural areas.
We would not be able to do a broadband project like this were it not for a funding agency like the Washington State Public Works Board. So they have provided $4.7 million for this LB Mineral Ashford fiber to the premises broadband project. And the project will serve approximately 1,360 residential and commercial households.
Public Works also awarded an additional $4.7 million to bring fiber optic broadband to the Vader community.
The fiber is kind of the future.
For Chief Medford, that future means more reliability for service calls.
Having the fiber now with the fast, reliable speed that's a consistent speed and its own pipe will be a benefit for those people calling 911. Their calls should not drop as much.
And for other emergency needs.
This facility is sometimes used by the Sheriff's Office for search and rescue, so this will be a huge hub for the search commanders to have technology to look at their GIS data, help with their investigations, help map where people might be missing. So there's a large component of that that will assist us.
For an area that has had its share of challenges, both before and after the pandemic, the work along Highway 7 is a signal of hope. The project won't be completed until 2026, but the possibility of opportunity is endless. Jennifer Huntley for TVW's Inside Olympia.
Joining me now to talk more about local government infrastructure needs and the role of the Public Works Board in making that a reality is Kelly Snyder, Public Works Director for Snohomish County, and Gary Rowe, who is a former, now retired, longtime county executive and county public works director up in Skagit and Jefferson counties, and also is now the vice chair of the Public Works Board. Thank you both for being here. Good to see you. And let's launch right in. This Public Works Board, we've got the sort of scene setter for the first half of the show of why it exists, what it does for communities, but you have been on the receiving end. You work in local government. Let me start with you. What is this source of funding? What does this board mean for communities like Snohomish County?
Well, thanks for having us here today. It really means a lot. This program, living as long as 40 years, is pretty incredible. And I think for local government, whether it's a county, a city, a special purpose district, we all see this as a vital source. We have to basket weave together fund sources to make a project go. Whether you're a small jurisdiction who might have a $5 million project, or let's say you're a large county with large projects that might cost over $100 million, these are the pieces of funding that are so vital. So we've had a road project that opened in the last couple of years. We went from 3 lanes to 5 lanes in a very urban corridor within Snohomish County. We were able to do curb, gutter, sidewalk, storm, drainage, and then we also removed some fish barriers that are so vital for making sure that our orcas can be safe within the Puget Sound. So the pieces and elements of these are vast. It's not just one little thing. It's oftentimes an integrated project.
And just to be clear, the Public Works Board funding that your county got for that project was a piece of the funding?
Is a piece of the funding,
Because
yes.
as you said, you're sort of putting it all together
Yes,
to get
so
what you need.
The fund source is limited for the Public Works Board to $10 million. So for these kinds of projects that Snohomish County is looking at, we're looking at $20, $30 million projects. So it's a piece. Right. So we might
One leg of the stool.
One leg of the stool.
Okay. Gary, you have an interesting perspective because you worked in county government for many, many years, as I noted, and you are now the vice chair of this board. So you see both sides of it. You see what it's like to be a recipient and the need, but also now the ability to have some influence on how this program is operated. From where you sit, how are you thinking about, especially 40 years in, and with huge infrastructure needs still unmet, the role of this board and its importance?
Well, as you mentioned, I was a young engineer when the board was first formed, and I had a project in the first year.
Wow.
It didn't seem like it was much at the time, but at the time we were experiencing a lot of inflation. And to be able to get a project funded in full rather than have it done in parts gave me the ability to get that project done completely at the time.
Was the key that you were getting a low interest
Very
loan?
much. It was at the time with inflation rates that were double digit, having a low interest loan was much easier than waiting another year and having a project cost that much more, or even maybe a few years, because we would have to put funding together over time. So that's an example of how using the borrowed money really helps move a project along. I live in Jefferson County, and I worked in Jefferson County, and the county has had several projects that were funded. One of the most recent one, I think, is a good example of how the Public Works Board has really helped the county. Probably about 10 years ago, I'd have to look at the exact time, the Jefferson County was able to leverage some dollars from the Public Works Board to be able to start developing a sewer system in the Port Hadlock area. This is a big lift for the community, because
This would be an area that was on septics, I presume, and
yes,
and you want to get them off septics, not have
Exactly.
that running into Puget Sound and get them on.
So we were able to provide funding to do the initial early work, to be able to purchase property, to be able to do the planning and things like that. And they were able to leverage those early investments along with local county funds to be able to get funding through the state budget, through the capital budget, for some of the federal funding that came in the last couple of years, AGA fundings or BIL fundings. And they've been able to leverage
That's the federal money.
Right, for about a $40 million project to be able to, and they're in construction now. And with those dollars, they're going to be able to support and provide services to low income and some great projects that are underway that would not be being done in that area, which is a big help for the county.
So obviously this program has been super beneficial for communities, and it's kind of a lifeline, and it provides, whether it's a small project and you can get all the funding you need through it, or it's a kind of piecing together the pieces. But the reality is there is so much infrastructure need. There's deferred maintenance. There are systems that are on the verge of failure. We read headlines around the country of like entire cities where their water system has imploded and isn't working anymore. So let's have a little reality check here about, like, you can point to the bright spots, but you're running a major county public works operation. What's the reality on the ground in terms of your needs and the funds that are available to meet them from all those sources?
Yeah, when I look at our transportation improvement program for the next 6 and 20 years, Snohomish County just adopted its new comprehensive plan. You know, we are thinking about what ways are we going to fund all of these projects, and it is a bit of a daunting task. You know, we see 30% inflation for construction, and we have had to make some hard choices about pushing out projects because we can only afford, we have to prioritize projects, and we can't afford all the things that we want to be able to do. So Public Works Board is a part of that. We have to think about Transportation Improvement Board. We also have to think about the legislature and those asks. We also worry about, this is a network. Transportation is a network for us. So, WashDOT needs its funding, county government needs its funding, cities need their funding. How do we basket weave all these projects together too? And we have Sound Transit coming to Snohomish County, and we need to make sure that we're ready for those things. So it's a daunting task, and I worry. It does cause me worry about how we're going to be able to deliver all of these things. And we're just looking at all the revenue sources right now and thinking about what's the future is going to look like.
I did your bio a disservice. I should also note you are a former executive director of the Public Works Board. You've worn many hats, but including that one. So, Gary, how would you answer that question? And we could layer in the fact that the president has just ordered tariffs on 2 of our key trading partners. We've obviously seen huge inflation in recent years. We've seen supply chain disruptions related to the COVID pandemic. And you've been in this business for decades. You see the need and the unmet need and all of the challenges. Give us a level setter reality check.
Well, it's typical federal, whether it's whatever program the federal is, there's always potential for impacts, whatever happens with the federal budget. What we do at the local level is try to be able to be there for those communities that need it when they need it. And one of the great programs that the Public Works Board has is this emergency program. Our emergency program provides the ability to be able to be one of the first providers of any agencies that can provide funding to a community. When they had the fires in Malden community a few years ago, we were in there right away to be able to provide funding for rebuilding their water system. We've had communities that have near disasters. Fortunately, we've been able to provide funding within a few weeks to be able to head off flooding or other types of things like that. You know, the talk about changes at the federal level for FEMA, for example, we don't know what that might be, but at the same time, at the local level, we do feel like we have a program that really provides the ability to be able to meet the need at a moment's notice. In eastern Washington, with the drawdown or the lowering of water tables, we've had several communities have lost their wells, and we've been able to come in there with funding to be able to replace those wells before the communities actually run out of water. So I think that's the great thing about the way we run the program. We are trying to be as flexible and responsive as possible, so those communities are able to get the funding they need when they need it.
But is it also fair to say that demand outstrips available funding?
Of course. Yeah, we have a limited amount of money. We have limits. For instance, we get an appropriation of $400 million. That sounds great, but only 20% of that money could be set aside for emergency or other pre-construction. So we're not an emergency agency by a long shot, but we're part of the overall response that the state has available to them to be able to do that. And so we feel like we can be responsive. We can be part of the solution.
I want to ask about sort of these two, it doesn't seem like these are necessarily core missions of the Public Works Board, but they are emerging issues, broadband and housing. Broadband is newer to the Public Works Board, and I understand that there's very little money available. There was quite a lot of demand for it. Of course, the federal infrastructure dollars is the BEAD program that's sending a lot of money into states for that. But, and this is probably not necessarily your bailiwick, but for either of you, like, is there a thought that this board and its funding should and could be sort of expanded to meet these sort of future needs, as opposed to just let's dig in the ground and replace the old sewer lines?
I can try to answer that. A few years ago, I think it was 2019, that was when the broadband was initially established in statute for the Public Works Board to administer, and we were provided a small amount of money at the time. It was around $45 million, and we allocated it out really quickly and got those projects out the door. Since then, there's been federal dollars, as you mentioned, the information, I guess, IIJA funds. I'm not sure exactly what it was.
Yeah, the BEAD, the BEAD program. Yeah,
that was the initial funding that provided us about somewhere around 80 or 40 million additional dollars, 80 million total for all of our program. And again, those dollars went out, but the new program that's on the horizon is the BEAD dollars that are coming, and those are being administered through the state broadband office and with collaboration from our office. But we know that once the broadband dollars are spent, those federal dollars, even though they're meant to be able to meet all the needs, there will still be a need that's there. So we're looking at what we call a post-BEAD strategy, and what do we do after those dollars are spent, and what are those dollars needs going to be, and we have the program in place to administer that at some point when that need is identified, and we can look at whether or not we'd be able to get the funding to be able to put that out. But I think it's important to point out that the dollars are making a huge difference right now. We see communities that have not, and I can speak again to my county, Jefferson County, where those dollars, whether it's the federal dollars or the state dollars, have made a significant difference, where the local PUD has started from essentially zero and are building an entire network for the community in Jefferson County, and will be a provider of broadband on into the future. So there's an example of a county that's going to really benefit from these dollars in the community.
And I think part of why I brought up broadband is it's evidence of the fact that infrastructure needs evolve. Some things stay the same. You're going to have roads and bridges. You're going to have water and sewer lines. But then as technology changes, then we start to think about, for instance, broadband and fiber in the ground as another form of infrastructure that has to be put in, and then it also has to be maintained. So the other sort of, a big pressing issue in the state right now is housing, affordable housing, the number of units. I know it's not directly tied to this program, but as you all are thinking about infrastructure for the future, building for the future, is there a role, either as a county planner or as you think about a program like this, to be thinking about how can we help solve the housing crisis, even though that's not your direct, line of responsibility?
So as a board, we had a board meeting on Friday and we talked about this a bit. And I think collectively, it's really important. Our role is making sure that if jurisdictions are in need, they can borrow at a low interest, which helps them keep their rates down. So that's the part, like it's about the housing, but it's also about living in the housing. And it's the total cost of that living. And so making sure that the funds are available to jurisdictions for their infrastructure keeps those infrastructure costs down. So affordable housing requires affordable infrastructure, and that's the role that we play right now. I think both of the questions that you're asking is about the nimbleness also of our program and our staff, who are fantastic. They have been able to stand up things over time, and then as money goes away, then we can close those down. And I think that's the flexibility of our program. So if the legislature says, hey, we have a new program for you, we will be able to figure out how to stand that up and figure out how to support the needs that come our way.
Yeah, so affordability for the communities, the low-interest loans are key to that, obviously. But one thing, again, that you don't control is the cost of these projects, inflation, all of those other challenges. And so I do wonder, when you layer on, and I'll ask you this, Gary, you layer on the unmet need and the fact that that need always outstrips the available dollars, and then you add in all of these variables that you have no control over, where does that put us in terms of, I guess maybe the way to ask the question is, are we going one step forward and two steps back at all times when it comes to our infrastructure? Or are you more optimistic about it?
I always tend to be an optimist. I think that we at the local level are very dependent on whether there's state funding or federal funding to provide meet the needs for infrastructure. I think that the board's direction is to basically try to build things that are sustainable, and so that we're not having to immediately look at replacing them. Every local jurisdiction, whether it's for roads or whether it's for water or sewer, are always up against the battle of being able to maintain and sustain what they have. And that's what's important, is how do we do that over time. I think that if you did an exhaustive study, you'd find that there's always going to be billions of dollars in need out there and not enough money to be able to meet that need. But the example that we hear about is the PFAS that's out there. Here's something that wasn't thought of, what we didn't know about 10 years ago, but that need to address that issue is going to come up. And so some way we're going to have to be able to identify whatever kind of funding is necessary, whether it's federal funding, state funding, to be able to address that particular issue. And there'll be another issue that may come and replace PFAS at some point. So it's an evolving and continuing situation. I do want to bring up one point back to what Kelly said regarding the funding. I think that we do have grant funding with the board, and when you're trying to keep rates lower, as you described, we do that very aggressively through low interest rates and grants. An example of that would be a project that might cost $4 million. If you went out on the open market with interest, it may cost over $5 million with loan repayment, but with grants and lower interest, especially for our severely distressed areas, we can get that payback on that project to be around $2 million. So that community can keep their rates lower and be able to afford that particular project.
I'm really glad you brought up PFAS, because we were talking about like new technologies, changing the definition of infrastructure, like with broadband, but then PFAS, chemicals in drinking water that are dangerous to the public health, that then have to be removed, and that's very costly. That's sort of these surprise issues that come up. And as you say, there might be something after PFAS. Right. So let me turn the kind of tables here a little bit and ask you, Kelly, about, so local governments and local entities are very dependent on the state and feds for funding for infrastructure, as Gary just laid out. The flip side, though, is what obligation do local governments have to be, in essence, taxing or charging their communities for future needs, to sort of say, okay, we built this, we know it's not going to last forever, so we better be saving for the next time or for the rainy day? And I realize you're not the elected leader here, but how do you think about this as a public works official? Just what skin in the game does the local government or its community have here?
So in Snohomish County, I'm in charge of roads and garbage and recycling that goes with that. And I think about the equivalency of water and sewer for this conversation is the garbage. And there are rates that we charge, and it's sort of a user fee. So people come in and self-haul and drop it off at our transfer stations, and then we haul it into some sort of intermodal yard and then onto a landfill and or recycle facility. And we have looked at making sure that we can maintain our rates, be able to provide all the operating services that we can, make sure that our capital investments are made. We've just finished our comprehensive plan update. We know that those needs are out there, and we have just run a rate study. So I think it's some of our obligation to look at those plans, identify the needs for rates, and then go to our leadership, elected officials, and say, here's what we're proposing, and then they can make that decision. And we bring to them the pros and cons of that, right? It is, we're very concerned about areas that are distressed, but it's also something that is a cost that must be used by those who are using the system. And so we're going to do that here soon, and we'll see what our electeds say.
Yeah. Do you have a thought about this, Gary, sort of the responsibility of the local governments to be making down payments on their future needs so they're not just dependent on state and federal funds?
Sure. I think that every community can be good about it, and some communities may need to do more work. It really kind of depends on what the resources and the capabilities of those communities. In many of the smaller communities, it's very tough for them to be able to come up with the amount of funds they need to be able to replace or sustain things over time. Most of the rate setting that we do is that they do. I don't do it. Excuse me. But they do. It goes through a public process. They have to be able to get those approved by their local, executive council or whatever their community is governed by, and it's tough. We understand that, and I think that when we look at some of the smaller communities, we have to be able to figure out a way to be able to help them along that process. In many cases, we, through technical assistance, the board staff through technical assistance will help those communities through their rate setting processes and things like that to be able to come up with the resources they need to be able to pay back a loan or provide funding for a project. But it is a challenge. It can't be denied that all communities have the challenge of finding the resources necessary to keep their infrastructure up to date.
We have just a couple minutes left, so I'll give each an opportunity to sort of close us out. What do you want the public, what do you want legislators? They're in session now, thinking about in the context of infrastructure needs, local government, this particular program. What's your takeaway message?
Thank you so much for creating it. It is a program that continues to serve communities for the last 40 years. It's an essential piece of that. Our ask this year is $400 million. We look at our model. That's what we think that the funding can help support. It's just a drop in the bucket in infrastructure needs across this state. I hope that we get that support, and also to really support the extension of SYNC. SYNC has just been a valuable resource. I think it's an efficiency model within state government, and hope that that can be supported as well. And congratulations to the Public Works Board, current staff, former staff, current board, past board, and all the elected officials across the state. It's an extraordinary program.
So a birthday worth celebrating.
That's right.
Okay. Gary Rowe, I'll give you the final word here.
I think that the board members that preceded us did a great job of telling the story about about the Public Works Board and the need for continued funding. Mm-hmm. We were fortunate to be able to get that funding restored in the current biennium, and I'm hoping that the legislators will see all the great things that are being done, the types of projects that are being funded, and they'll see the need to continue providing funding on into the future.
Okay. Gary Rowe, who is the vice chair of the Public Works Board, and as we mentioned, retired county government official, and then Kelly Snyder, current Public Works Director in Snohomish County. You've done a lot of things. UW, Assistant Vice Chancellor roles, other state government roles, or other county roles, plus the Public Works Board. You've done it all. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Good to talk to you, and thank you for watching Inside Olympia. We will see you again next week.